Hello viewers and welcome to yet another episode of The Big Talk. My name is Tineri Mbochi-Bagidi and today my guest is none other than the president of the MDC, Douglas Mwonzora. Mr. Mwonzora, thank you very much for taking time to join us. We know you're a busy man. Thank you very much to take time off your busy schedule to be with me on The Big Talk.
Well, thank you very much, Tino Wimbo, and I want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to discuss the issues affecting our land. And I also want to take this opportunity to greet the Zimbabweans out there. I know life is not easy, but one day this country shall be free.
Kuzolong. Thank you very much, sir. And today we'll be discussing post-political insights, as it's just been over a month since Zimbabwe held the August 23 general elections. And my first question would be, you took the nation by surprise, say, when you withdrew your candidature from the presidential run of the recently held August 23 general elections. And you cited irregularities within the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, which is the electoral board in our nation. Was this, would you maybe shed more light on these irregularities? And was this the main reason you withdrew your candidature? Or maybe you were saving yourself from embarrassment?
It must be remembered, Ruimbo, that before we announced the withdrawal of the main candidate, the presidential candidate, we had just launched our manifesto. So we were the only party that at that time that had launched its manifesto, and that was on the 1st of August. But unfortunately, immediately after launching the manifesto, we were then summoned by the High Court. And we were told that our application to have our 87 candidates, parliamentary candidates, reinstated had not been successful. So there we were without 87 of our parliamentary candidates. And I was a presidential candidate without 87 MPs. And that presented a big problem. And they were disqualified in very unfair circumstances. They were discriminated by the Zimbabwe Election Commission. And as you know, the Zimbabwe Election Commission extended the period of payment to the 22nd. They did not extend to the MDC specifically. They said this extension does not cover the movement for democratic change. And behind the scenes, of course, we were being told that we were the same people who had taken the Zimbabwe Election Commission to court over delimitation. So we were being treated very unfairly by the ZEC. But we also felt that the courts had acted very unfairly to us, and in a discriminatory way too. You know, of course, that there were 12 MPs from the Triple C in Bulawayo who were in similar, if not worse, circumstances to the 87 of the MDC. They were given back their chance to contest the election, and the 87 were not given. This is the first time in the history of our country where 87 people are being disqualified. But more importantly, where 87 constituencies are being denied the right to choose. So we felt that it was not correct that I should proceed. And among other reasons, I withdrew in solidarity with my candidates. But there were other issues too. As you know, we had taken the ZEC to court over delimitation, and the Constitutional Court refused to hear us. They didn't pass judgment. They didn't say our application was wrong. They simply say, we refuse to hear you. So we went to the election with a faulty...
That was just their reason.
That was their reason. I know these judges very well. First of all, I created the Constitutional Court as a constitutional writer in COPAC. In fact, I was the one who insisted on the creation of that court. And I have interacted with these judges. They are men and women of very, very high intelligence. And the way they behaved on that day is atypical. They were acting under pressure. And I don't know which pressure, where this pressure was coming from. But definitely, this was not an election to go. It was an election which was a foregone conclusion, and I didn't want to participate in a farce and in a fraud, and take the people of Zimbabwe for fools. I have heard this allegation, Tinevimbo, that I pulled out because I was afraid of losing the election. Well, I have been a lawyer for over 33 years, and I can be one of the first people to tell you that you don't win all your cases every time. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. So lawyers are rarely afraid of losing. And that was not the reason. The people of Zimbabwe are going to choose anyway. But if you go to the statistics, you will be surprised. And I know many Zimbabweans haven't looked at these statistics the way we have. I was given a vote after my withdrawal. I think I was given 29,000. And then there were 91,000 spoiled papers. And I have knowledge about what was written on some of them. Some of them, they wrote a delimitation. Some of them, they wrote Mwonzora was right. Some of them, Mwonzora Chibaba, that was the more flattering one. So 91,000 spoiled their ballots. But 2.6 million people, registered voters, decided to boycott the election as well. So this is a very big statistic, and it must be a sobering one for those who were my potential opponents. And therefore, the fact that this issue that I was afraid of elections is not correct. There was that 2.6 million for the taking. They didn't vote for President Mnangagwa. They didn't vote for Advocate Chamisa. And of course, I had pulled out of that election. And these people, this statistic, we are very flattered by it.
Okay. And say, I would like to go back to your response where you mentioned the 2.6 million Zimbabweans who had registered to vote but decided to not vote. Reports are saying that's about from 85% in voter turnout in the last elections. This year we decreased to 68%. What could be some of the reasons for voter apathy and for people actually just not going to vote despite being registered voters?
The people of Zimbabwe agreed with us that the delimitation was wrong. They totally agreed with us. In fact, we had a lot of support from across the political divide that the delimitation was wrong. They also were nauseated by the rank discrimination that other political parties went through, and the whole manner in which ZEC was doing its business. They then came to the said conclusion that their vote would not matter. So they decided to stay at home. They were disillusioned by this electoral system. And if this persists, if there are no meaningful electoral reform, the apathy will get worse and worse. And there was a warning about this apathy in the by-elections. Only 22% of people who were eligible to vote went and voted in the by-election. And people ignored that bit. They were too excited, some of the political parties, because they gained seats, But the important thing when you contest an election of this nature is to gain political power and not to gain some sort of representation somewhere in parliament or in council. So apathy is going to be there unless there are drastic measures that have been taken to institute key political, social, and economic reforms, but mostly electoral reforms. And these reforms may include revisiting the delimitation. It has to be redone. Remember, this delimitation report is going to govern 2028 elections. So the invalidity that you saw in 2023 is going to visit us once more. Number two, ZEC has to be reformed. This body is a vindictive body. It is made up of people who have vested interest. Its chief elections officer is a soldier. Mr. Slaigwana is a soldier and behaved like one in this election. He was the stumbling block.
How do soldiers behave?
Well, he behaved like a soldier with orders. The soldiers act in accordance with orders and rarely exercise discretion, even where it is reasonable to do so. He refused flatly to allow MDC 87 while allowing others to contest. And there he was behaving like somebody with orders. So we need to reform ZEC. We also need to make sure that we remove all forms of disenfranchisement. For example, the nomination fee is 20,000 for the president, 1,000.
I'm sitting to a rich man, because if you could afford to pay 20,000 for the nomination fee, that means I'm sitting next to a rich man.
I wish I was rich, Tinewimbo. Unfortunately, they haven't refunded me. If they'd refunded me, I would be taking you to lunch, you know. But they haven't refunded us. But they put that figure of nomination. It is outrageous, probably the highest in the world, I think. And then 1,000 for the MPs. So 210 MPs, you need $210,000. Unless the MPs are paying for themselves. Now, by hiking these nomination fees, ZEC and the government made the election a class issue. It is an issue, it is an affair of people who can afford. It's not an affair for people from Mbare, Highfield, Mfakose, and so on. So it was quite wrong for them to do that, and we need to remove that. So we need serious electoral reforms.
And still on the issue of electoral reforms, what's your take on the whole electoral process? You mentioned the delimitation process, which the civic society and many opposition leaders, members, and also even the general public and analysts have condemned. And there's also, you mentioned how ZEC needs to be an independent body, and we defranchise the electoral body. Do you think that this flows? Because we know the election is just not a single day. It's a whole process. From the moment someone is sworn in as president to the next election, that's the whole process. And there have been many flows reported by Sadak, reported by EU and all the observers who came through. And some, I'm sure, as your party, you also observed during this last election. Do you think that those flows influenced the result we got in this year's election, which saw Mr. President Emmerson Mnangagwa's re-election?
I think these flaws were fundamental at Tinewimbo, and these include the availability of the voters' roll. The voters' roll was not made available by ZEC on demand by the political parties, including by ourselves. And in fact, they put a prohibitive fee of 187,000 United States dollars to get a copy of the voters' roll. Some people had to litigate in the courts, and again the courts acted typically in favor of ZEC. And when the voters' roll was finally made available belatedly, it was not in the format as provided in the Constitution. It was not analyzable. A voter's roll should be analyzable. In other words, I should be able to analyze how many women are on the voters' roll. And to say, or how many women of a particular age, I must be able to extract that with ease. Now, I may not know exactly what happened on polling day, because, as you know, we were no longer in the election. Those who participated in that election would know. But these flaws, if I look at them, they have the effect of affecting the validity of the election. If the delimitation report is wrong, then the election can't be right, whatever the result is. The numericals don't matter, because when you look at this election, there are two things that makes an election invalid. There are the qualitative aspects, like the issue of the delimitation, the freeness, the intimidation, and so on. Then there are the quantitative aspects. Was the counting correct? Was the collation correct? Now, I will not be able to verify on the quantitative aspects, but on the qualitative, it is clear that this election cannot stand as valid.
Okay, and the opposition, and I'm sure, let me not say I'm sure, the opposition and probably a majority of Zimbabweans are hoping for a diplomatic solution to the disputed election, which we recently held as a country. Could the regional body, which is Sadak, in any way be able to lobby for a diplomatic solution for Zimbabwe? And also, is the regional board, the Sadak, mandated to intervene within Zim politics?
It is within Sadak's power to try to find a diplomatic solution on the Zimbabwean crisis, and they've done that before. They intervened in 2008 and forced the Zimbabwean parties into a solution. They acted in a diplomatic manner. So yes, they are able to do that. The African Union is able to do that, to put pressure on this regime so that it accedes to the demands of the opposition. Yes, that they are able to do. Are they able to intervene in the election? No, they are not. Sadak has never in its history declared the results of an election valid or invalid. And in this report, it does not even do that. I've seen people saying that the Sadak reports say the Zimbabwean election results are invalid. No, it doesn't say that. The Sadak report says some aspects of the Sadak election fall short of the requirements of the Constitution, the Electoral Act, and the guidelines. Now, to stretch it to say that they've said it is invalid, it is not correct. So Sadak has also never acted in favor of the opposition in Zimbabwe. So I don't understand where my friends within the opposition are getting their optimism from.
Maybe
there is not going to be.
Optimism is coming from the fact that in the history of elections in Zimbabwe, Sadak had never made a preliminary report which actually is identifying the flaws within our electoral process. Just saying it's a maybe. I wouldn't.
In fact, it has done that on a number of occasions, really. Notably in 2008, yes. It made those observations, especially after the Sadak observers themselves were beaten by ZANU-PF thugs. They produced a report. This is not the first time that Sadak has produced a report that is damning. But remember, this is not a report by Sadak. This is a report by the Sadak Observer Mission. The Sadak itself, the Troika itself, is yet to sit. The real Sadak, the group of member states, is again yet to sit. And let me just bring your mind to back to what the heads of state of Sadak have done. They've congratulated President Mnangagwa and they've wished him good luck. Some have expressed opinion on the election. Fikile Mbalula was here from the ANC and made it clear that they will side with another liberation movement. Let's not forget that the majority of the key countries in this Sadak, are run by liberation movements. And it's a club of brothers and sisters. And to expect that they are going to say, President Mnangagwa, your election was invalid. Please have a rerun. It is not going to happen. And a rerun in Zimbabwe is only done in two circumstances. The first one is where one of the leading candidate doesn't get 50% plus one, in which case the Zimbabwe Election Commission orders a rerun. They did that in 2008. The second one is where the losing presidential candidate goes to the Constitutional Court and wins. And the Constitutional Court rules that the election is invalid and orders a rerun. There is no other way. Sadak has never ordered a rerun and has never nullified elections in a member country. In 2008, which was worse than we had in 2023, objectively speaking, Sadak did not nullify Mugabe's election, where it was clear that this was null and void. Sadak didn't nullify his election. What Sadak did is it pressurized him to have an inclusive government with Changrai and company. So to expect Sadak to nullify elections, to order a rerun, that is impossible. And those people who are pushing it know that that's wrong. They know it is not going to happen. And probably people are managing the supporters because the supporters have got expectations. There is also talk about the National Transitional Authority. I have heard that talk. Again, we don't want to give Zimbabweans false hope. And I'm sorry if to the Zimbabweans if I'm giving them bad news. But I would rather tell Zimbabweans the truth than lie to them. The National Transitional Authority will not work. First of all, the Constitution does not provide for a National Transitional Authority at all. Secondly, for the National Transitional Authority proposition to work, the government, the ruling party, must agree that it has done wrong and must agree to resign. In other words, President Mnangagwa must actually agree to resign. I don't see that happening. Then the fourth problem is that in a National Transitional Authority, you are putting the fate of the country in the hands of unelected people. Where it has been instituted, you take a nice bishop or a nice businessman and you say you are heading the affairs of the nation now. They may be nice, they may be prominent, but the fact of the matter, Tinewimbo, is that they are unelected. Okay. So it's also undemocratic. But it is a very, very impracticable, and it is very utopian. The opposition in Zimbabwe must become truthful, and we must face reality. We need electoral reforms. We need to work together to make sure that there are electoral reforms in this country. We have to look beyond 2023. It has come and it is gone. We have to look at safeguarding the people's vote in 2028.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. And you mentioned how that you mentioned our court, and you say that as the opposition, you need to be lobbying for electoral reforms because the 2023 general elections train has come and has since left, and now we're looking forward to 2028. And you're saying that if there are no reforms to the next election, then probably it's going to be a cycle over and over again. You mentioned the MDC 87 who could not take part in the elections, and after your party's experience as MDC, from the history of MDC and with you now as president of MDC, your experience with the courts, do you think that the legal route in Zimbabwe would work? Because you also mentioned how on many occasions when you guys were going to court, how the court was ruling in favor of the electoral body. So do you think that any legal route with regards to politics and electoral reforms could work for the opposition?
No, it would work where the judiciary is basically captured. The legal route will not work. It is clear that there are tentacles, unprofessional tentacles that are poking, that are getting into the affairs of the courts. That is very, very clear. And I saw it for myself. So what is needed is not litigation at this point in time. Litigation, it's a place has come and went as well. When we are talking about electoral reforms, we are talking about reforms that have to come via dialogue. A dialogue which should be inclusive, genuine, and unconditional. In other words, we must be able to engage the government with the aid of Sadak and the international community. We want the government to be compelled or to be persuaded to speak to the opposition so that we discuss the electoral reforms. Once we agree on these electoral reforms, then they are formally introduced in Parliament as legislation. They are formally legislated. Okay. And then we know that they are now cast in stone. That's the only way we can do that. Any other way, the ZANU-PF will be quite happy to stall progress and go to 2028 under the same conditions, because these conditions do they do favor them, you know. So we need electoral reforms and we need dialogue, and this dialogue must involve the political actors, it must involve the ruling party, it must involve the church, trade unions and civil society. All stakeholders must be involved. And the international community must come in. South Africa must come in as a good neighbor and help and nudge ZANU-PF to say it is sensible that they must talk to the opposition. President Mbeki, in an interview, I think a week ago, said a very, very important thing, that what is important is what is in the best interest of the people of Zimbabwe. Right now, let's face it, Newimbo, the people of Zimbabwe are suffering. The suffering hasn't gone away, it is exacerbated. There is no electricity, school fees is a challenge, access to health, people are dying because they cannot afford. Poverty is so grinding that there are some families who don't know where the next meal is going to come from. This is what must be our concern as the leaders in this country. And I know that I have been speaking about dialogue. ZANU-PF didn't listen. The CCC were very condescending about it, and the other political parties thought that I was trying to ingratiate myself with ZANU-PF. But
they called you ZANU-PF light?
Yes, they did. But they were the ones who were favored by ZANU-PF during the election. My candidates, 87, were denied. Their candidates were taken in, and therefore who is being favored there? And so with the fullness of time, Ruvimbo, Zimbabweans are going to know the truth. Zimbabweans have been taken for a ride, and those people who have taken Zimbabweans for a ride know it. But maybe that is the topic for another day. What is important is that there must be dialogue. So we are reinstating our position that there must be dialogue in Zimbabwe. And if ZANU-PF is unwilling and unable to have dialogue with us, then the international community must come in so that there is dialogue in Zimbabwe.
And actually, you responded to a question that I was going to ask you next, which is the one on dialogue. And there's been pollard over the last few years in our country. There's been pollard. So, do you think that you are lobbying for dialogue with you mentioned that with the ruling party, the opposition, civic society, traditional leaders, the religious leaders, and why hasn't dialogue worked over the last few years? And do you think that it would work now? Because we're looking at Pollard, which probably failed to lure the opposition into dialogue, but probably the churches and some traditional leaders were lobbying for dialogue. But why would it work now when it seems to haven't been successful over the last few years?
Well, first of all, Tinewimbo, dialogue has succeeded sometime in the past. Remember, the War of Liberation was ended with Lancaster House agreement. That itself was a product of dialogue. The Matabeleland genocide that happened was ended with the signing of the Unity Accord. That was dialogue. The bloodletting that took place in 2008 ended up with the conclusion of the global political agreement and the government of national unity. That was dialogue. Over the recent years now, you have seen that there has not been dialogue at all, because ZANU-PF has basically stalled the dialogue. First of all, the President Mnangagwa insisted that the dialogue can only take place in Poland. Now, Poland is necessary but not sufficient, because it is made up of political actors only. The problems of this country go beyond the political actors. And by the way, if one is to be blunt about it, political actors are the culprits. So you need dialogue that includes other people, that is the churches and the other civic society organizations, and the Pollard doesn't. And this is why some political parties, including the MDC, did not find it attractive to go to Poland because it was useless. And President Mnangagwa in his speech says that Poland achieved a lot. He did not mention a single thing that it achieved. And that means
maybe you didn't have time to shed more light.
Because it did not achieve anything, I can tell you that. Well, it made a lot of recommendations. Professor Maduku and company did a lot of work in doing the recommendations for electoral reforms. Very impressive. President Mnangagwa ignored them and went on to do his own thing in parliament there through his ministers, Yambi. So when we do dialogue, the dialogue that I'm talking about, it must result in binding agreements. The agreements in Poland are binding in honor. In other words, you are at liberty not to follow them. You know, you are left with, it's a moral issue, whether you feel morally guilty to follow them or not. So we don't want that type of dialogue. We want serious dialogue that results in concrete agreements. And we are very prepared that the government, we are prepared to sit down with it, other political parties. I know there are my friends within the opposition who were against dialogue, who were even for the delimitation report, to an extent that they sent a lawyer to argue in favor of the delimitation report, who are now crying about it. And we need to work together.
Okay, and thank you very much on that enlightenment on the issue of the need for dialogue in Zimbabwe. So you say that if there's dialogue, which is outside Poland, because you called Poland necessary but insufficient, yes, right? So if there is dialogue, there's room for dialogue, or the president actually opens room for dialogue, which is outside Poland, would you be keen on being part of that dialogue?
Of course, because we are the ones who have advocated for it for years. I have been speaking about dialogue in this country for the past 3 years, and people have not been listening. I talked about the delimitation. If there had been dialogue, Tinewimbo would not have problems with had problems with delimitation, because we would have resolved it at that level. We would not have had problems with the voters' roll. We would not have had the problem that we saw, the discrimination, the outrageous fees. We would have raised that issue, those issues at that point in time. We would not have embarrassed ourselves as a nation on election day, where our election management body was basically failing to run an election as if it was running the election for the first time. We would not be having these reports from Sadak, from the AU, and from all observer missions. We would have forestalled all of that. But they say a prophet hath no honor in his own land. Maybe they thought we were insignificant, but we were right. History has proven that the MDC was correct. And I hope that next time people do listen when others speak. This is the problem of the Zimbabwean political discourse, you know. It is a typical conversation of the deaf. No one listens to the other. But we want dialogue. And during dialogue, we are able to speak rationally to one another.
And everyone listens to the
Yes.
other.
Yes.
Okay, we're about to close. This is probably one of my last questions. Did the lack of an independent, parallel tabulation of the vote complicate the validity of the results that were announced by ZEC, which saw the re-election of President Emmerson Mnangagwa and Advocate Nelson Chamisa falling short with 44%?
Well, parallel voter tabulation is not done by ZEC. It is done by the opposition. So those who participated in the election should have done parallel voter tabulation. They have no one to blame. You know, if you decide to go into the election, you must have a parallel voter tabulation system. I had the system here in the boardroom here, where we were prepared. It was manned by about 20 youngsters, and we were going to be recording all the information. Now, if you do not have parallel voter tabulation, you cannot dispute the figures. Because first of all, the opposition did not have, by opposition I'm talking about the Triple C here, they did not have enough polling agents. In fact, in the majority of their
Constituencies.
yes, they did not have polling agents. And therefore, when a figure comes, you cannot dispute it. And you cannot say it complicates the results. It is something that you must have when you go to an election. If you don't have it and you go to the election nevertheless, you cannot cry foul. Yes. So the situation that we found ourselves in 2023 is akin to what happened in 2018. And in 2018, there were about 2,000 polling stations where the MDC Alliance then did not have polling agents. So we could not have those funny forms, the V11. And the reason why the Triple C and ourselves could not get agents this time is because we, together with ZANU-PF, had negotiated a fund from the European Union for the training and deployment of polling agents by the 3 political parties. And we had secured a funding of 3 million euro. So roughly MDC was going to get 1 million euro, Triple C 1 million, ZANU-PF 1 million for the training and the deployment of polling agents. So we were going to have polling agents in every polling station, and it was going to be more transparent. And this situation happened in 2018. We accessed this money together. But with a few weeks to go, ZANU-PF wrote to the European Union to say that is foreign funding. European Union must take back its money. They threatened to arrest the local organization that was supposed to disburse the money. That showed that they wanted to make sure that it was not transparent.
Okay. Thank you very much. I guess these are the lessons that we are taking as political leaders, as citizens, and also for myself, as young people, as the youth of Zimbabwe on the route to 2028. We're taking a few lessons, what could have gone right, what went wrong, and what to do better in the near future. And lastly, so that I don't take the rest of your day with me, Mr. Mwonzora, what does the future hold for you and MDC? What is the future? What does the future hold, given that now it's like we're starting another electoral process, making our way to 2028?
Well, I'm very happy first that the MDC is not represented in any elected body like the parliament, and so on. Is certainly not in the cabinet. That gives us a lot of time to work, and I have called my leaders that we want to go to work. We have started a program called Reset, Restart and Recover All, where we are going to the basics. We are reorganizing our party. We are very, very happy about that, about the progress. We are reorganizing the youth, the women, and we are also addressing the issue of apathy. Why do people not go to vote? We have done a document on the exact electoral reforms that we want, and we are going to be popularizing that. We are on a diplomatic offensive. Next week I am going to England, where I'm going to attend the conference of the Labour Party. And that's a big thing for us to be invited. It is a sister party to the MDC. But we are networking with the Labour Party and the other social democratic parties in Europe. So the future for the MDC is very, very good. In fact, it may be a blessing in disguise that the MDC is not in parliament. Because it will make us work and it will make us have a lot of time. After all, we were not formed in order to be in parliament. We were formed to take over governmental power. And now that we are starting right now in 2023 to prepare for 2028, you are going to see a very, very different and resurgent MDC.
Okay, you said you're restarting?
It's a reset, restart, and recover all. Okay. Now, the recover all part, I may tell you about it. There is a verse in the Bible. David pursued, overtook, and recovered all. So at least there we are according with the Bible. Okay. So it is reset, restart, and recover all.
Okay. I don't know why in my head when you mentioned restore all, where I will cover all, where I thought of that verse which says, and Sean, I think Zvakadyi wanempedza chose nekwata kwata. That's where my mind went. But thank you very much for that. And thank you very much for taking time off your busy schedule to be with us on the Big Talk. That was the president of MDC, Douglas Mwonzora, and he emphasized that he's not ZANU-PF light, because if he was a dead ZANU-PF light, then the MDC 87 would probably had a chance, like the CCC Bulawayo 12. It was another episode of the Big Talk with myself, Tineri Mbochi-Bagidi, and our guest, Douglas Mwonzora, where we were discussing post-election insights after the August 23 general elections. And until the next episode, it's goodbye for now. Thank you for watching.